So thinking once again about this comparison of complete and incomplete contracts, let's think about three features of complete contracts. So, firstly, we have Pareto efficiency. Like we said earlier, the Nash equilibrium is going to be Pareto efficient, and we'll review exactly why that's true. Secondly, there is no rent for the agent in the complete contracting equilibrium, where there was in the incomplete contracting equilibrium. And thirdly, the market clears with the complete contracting equilibrium, whereas it did not in the incomplete contracting equilibrium. So, the first point is about Pareto efficiency. What we require for Pareto efficiency is that the marginal rate of substitution of the parties involved are equal to each other. And what we see there is Patricia offered Armin a contract that implemented the MRSP equals MRSA rule. That is, that the slope of the isocost equals the slope of the indifference curve. Or in the case of incomplete contract, it would have had to equal the slope of the isovalue curve. Now, in this case, that the marginal rates of substitution are equal, that guarantees that we have a Pareto efficient outcome. The reason being that, remember that marginal rate of substitution, it can also be interpreted as willingness to sell or willingness to pay. In this case, there is no alternative outcome where either of them would be willing to pay for an additional unit. So here we're seeing that the Patricia's willingness to pay is equal to Armin's willingness to pay. Secondly, it is not possible by choosing some allocation other than QC equal to 0.5 and PC equal to 2 times U underbar for Patricia to be better off without Armin being worse off. Remember, what's that saying here? In order for one of them to do better, the other one has to be worse off. Okay? So that's saying in order for us to move to another outcome, the other outcomes that they would move to be better for Patricia, has to be worse for Armin. Therefore, C is going to be Pareto efficient. Now, in terms of the rent, what do we see here? The supplier's utility under the contract is identical to his next best alternative. So here Armin, here he's getting utility equal to his participation constraint, U0. Now, if you recall the distance between N and C from previously, so N to C, what was that? When we tried to understand what Armin got in the incomplete contracting case, that distance N to C between N and his participation constraint was what he received as an enforcement rent at the equilibrium of the incomplete contracting case. Now, instead of that, a rent has been transferred from the agent to the principal. The agent previously had this rent, now the principal has it. They have not needed to provide an enforcement rent to the agent in order to elicit quality from them. So there's no rent at point C in the interaction. Armin's quality is equal to 0. And finally, the market clears. So the important thing here is that enforcement rents, or rents in general, are the consequence of markets that do not clear. So the fact that the agent receives no rent means he is no better off with the transaction than he would be at his fallback position. Therefore, it must be that there are no other agents just like Armin who are unable to sell their goods. Okay, so remember when we were looking at competitive markets in Chapter 9, and we had non-equilibrium prices above or below the equilibrium price, and there were rents either on behalf of buyers or sellers, depending on whether there was excess demand or excess supply. What we saw is those rents got competed away, and when we had complete contracts and unlimited competition, you ended up with clearing markets. Similarly here, now that we have complete contracting, we end up with the rents vanishing on behalf of the agents. And so we have no agents who are kind of unemployed. There's no longer excess supply of agents who want contracts, given the price stipulated by the incomplete contract. So this means that in the complete contracting case, we have a market clearing equilibrium, whereas we did not have a market clearing equilibrium in the incomplete contracting case. Now, it's very important to remind ourselves, though, that this is all a consequence of an imaginary magical device which tells Patricia exactly what the quality of the good is that she's bought from Armin. Such devices are incredibly hard to come by, and that's why we said they're imaginary or magical. To be sure, in certain instances, certain kinds of technologies might help us improve our knowledge of the detection of quality, right? And we'll explore some of that later in the chapter. But in many cases, it is incredibly hard, A, to know what quality is with certainty, and B, to make sure that it is contractable and verifiable to a third party. So, let's summarize a little bit. I'm going to make myself vanish. In incomplete contracts, the constraint on the principal's optimization process is the incentive compatibility constraint, whereas in complete contracting, you have the participation constraint. The agent's or the seller's utility is going to be what they receive at their fallback position of 0. At the Nash equilibrium, the price paid at the Nash is Pn, whereas you have 2 U bar being the price paid in the complete contracting case. So we see that the price is double in the incomplete contracting case versus the complete contracting case. The Nash equilibrium quality provided is 1/2 in both cases, as we saw. But again, it's important to remind ourselves that's just model specific and depends on the functional forms that we used for Armin's utility function. The expected duration of the interaction in periods when quality was 1/2 was 2 periods. So that's the expectation on average. Now remind ourselves, even though that's on average, in certain cases it could be shorter or longer. In the complete contracting case, the interactions are simply one shot. The buyer can simply buy quality because there's a complete contract, and so they don't need to have a repeated interaction. Then the cost of quality to the principal, which is C sub Q, the first derivative of cost with respect to quality, is equal to P over Q. That's from the slope of their isocost curve. In the case of a complete contract, that will be 4 times U under bar. So we see that the cost to the principal is 1/2 in the complete contracting case what it was in the incomplete contracting case. And the agent's utility, they get 2 U under bar in the incomplete contracting case per period, whereas they get 0 in the complete contracting case. Why? They're on their participation constraint, they get 0 utility. And some final other questions. Is there an enforcement rent? Does the market clear in equilibrium? Does the principal exercise short side power? Are interactions durable? And is there a Pareto efficient Nash equilibrium? So, we see that there is an enforcement rent in the complete contracting case, and that enforcement rent is for U under bar. Okay? Then there is market clearing in equilibrium, and that does not exist in the incomplete contracting case, whereas it does in the complete contracting case. Does the principal exercise short side power? Yes, they do in the incomplete contracting case, but they do not in the complete contracting case. And finally, we have a question about durable interactions. A durable interaction is an interaction where principals and agents will be engaged in bilateral trade that last over several periods. So these are the kinds of interactions where the principal and the agent will interact repeatedly. And so we see that these interactions are durable in the incomplete contracting case, but they're not in the complete contracting case. In the complete contracting case, there's no reason for interactions to be durable because the principal can just purchase quality for a given price. And then finally, on the question of Pareto efficiency at the Nash equilibrium, in the incomplete contracting case, the Nash equilibrium is Pareto inefficient, whereas in the complete contracting case, it is Pareto efficient. So we see that we have an efficient but unequal equilibrium in the complete contracting case, but we have an inefficient but more equal to some extent because the agent is getting a utility above their participation constraint in the incomplete contracting case.